11. The liver of the earth. 16 January 1847. After the spleen, the liver emerges as one of the most important visceral parts. The liver is the secretion apparatus in the animal, as in our telluric body, and therefore deserves, like the spleen, special attention. Man, like animals, eats food that contains as much deadly poisonous substance as vitalizing nutritive substance. Therefore, every human, as well as every animal, after having eaten a meal, would be bodily killed if there were not such an apparatus in the body which would greedily draw all these poisonous substances, as mainly carbon and blue acid bitter substance, and collect them partly in a separate container, and partly discharge them through the urinary tract. This apparatus is exactly the mentioned liver. Its construction is quite similar to that of the spleen, that is, as far as the internal construction is concerned. Only the form has more similarity with that of the lung. This piece of viscera therefore also consists of a number of chambers arranged in a row, which are like those of the spleen, but only somewhat more closely connected with each other. In addition to these chambers, the liver is mainly crossed through by 4 different vascular tubes, which, however, do not have the shape of those that pass through the spleen, but they are uniformly continuous organs, which are connected with each other by even smaller through-fare vessels, through which all organs of this piece of viscera are in a mutual connection. A part of these vessels goes out of the heart and leads rather rich blood into this viscera, so that the blood is saturated here with the necessary degree of carbon, as well as with a relatively small dose of blue acid, where it is then, thus saturated, suitable to accomplish the digestion in the digestive vessels, and from there on further, to also form the outer skin. The blood is not suitable for internal use, which is why liver diseases are easily recognizable mainly on the outer skin. This is a kind of continuous vessels. A second type goes from the stomach to the liver. This takes up all the watery substances in which the blue acid is very much diluted, and in the liver it is released into the blood through the small connecting vessels in a just proportion, and the remaining part is released through the liver, through the kidneys, into the urinary bladder, which then expels it as a useless substance through the urethra, and is completely transported out of the body. This is the second type of vessel that pass through this piece of viscera. A third class of vessels starts again from the stomach and connects especially the mucous membranes of the stomach with the gallbladder in the liver. Through these vessels, the mucous carbon or bile is separated from the food in the stomach, and is for the most part stored in the gallbladder for the sake of the human or the animal developing too little of this digestive substance in the stomach through the ingested food. If this were to happen, then the liver must deliver something back to the stomach out of its supply. For all digestion consists of a kind of fermentation, of which some nutrients are known to be more capable than others. Again, some substances with very watery content have very little nutrients in them, which everyone can already notice in the outside world. Just take pure water into a vessel and add a little bran flour. Allow the mixture to stand for a long time until it starts to ferment. But if you fill another vessel with wine must and add a little more barley or rice flour to it, in a few hours it will ferment so much that you will hardly know what to do with it. If, however, it can be seen from this that some substances which humans, like animals, consume as food have more or less carbon or fermentation substance in them, then it must also be clear that on the one hand, the abundance of this substance in our liver has to come to the aid of the lack of this substance if the nutrients ingested are of too small quantity. Through these vessels, we have now gotten to know the third kind. A fourth class of vessels that run through this piece of intestine are the small wined veins, which starting from the lungs are guided through the liver in multiple curves and twists. The gallbladder is partly formed by these vessels and partly maintained in constant tension. At the same time, a fair amount of atmospheric air is always brought into the bile through these vessels, and so much oxygen through the atmospheric air that the bile does not begin to ferment too much, and this fermentation then produces that malignant substance in the body, from which mainly all kinds of things, as inflammation, rheumatism, gout, and the like, come to light. Hence, it is also very bad for people to stay in such places and rooms in which, instead of the invigorating pure atmospheric air, they only inhale nitrogen, in which there is very little oxygen, but more toxic nitrogen. And take note, especially in those cursed inns, in which the guests prepare themselves for the most vigorous of the stench of hell, with the most hideous tobacco smoke. In this way, we have now become acquainted with the 4 types of vessels in our liver, whose action and reaction are brought about again, as in the case of the spleen, by the electrical fluid that is in the aforementioned chambers, as in the case of the spleen, produced by a rubbing movement of this chamber. But of course, the electrical fire of the liver is mainly excited by the fire of the spleen, for the liver would be quite dead and inactive without the spleen. In humans, as in all animals, this part of the gut is around the stomach, because it is there that it is most needed. So this piece of the intestine makes up, of course, an appropriately great part of the earth. Its function is exactly the same as that of the liver in animals. Even though it performs only a secondary function, which the spleen does in the first place, it is nevertheless a no less powerful part of vitalization in every animal organic body. For everything that the earth's crust carries on itself and on its surface comes out of the liver of the earth. So, all seawater is derived from this, and is basically nothing else than the urine expelled from the earth's body. But which urine, regardless of this, evaporates again into clouds, which are transformed into sweet, nutritious water in the air through the action of light. In this way, we have now gotten to know this part of the earth's intestines as thoroughly as possible in a very brief way, and will therefore soon move on to another.